Damian Menzies. I'm the CEO and the owner of Choice, and we're happy to be the sponsor of Disruption Circle. For those of you who have been to Disruption Circle before, welcome back. For those of you who haven't been here before, Disruption Circle is designed to do two things. First and foremost, to introduce you to thought leadership, and our two guest speakers today certainly have got plenty of thought provocative comments and discussion items that they want to cover with us today. And secondly, and probably most importantly for all of you, it's to help you build a network of senior HR trusted professionals that you can tap into for when disruption strikes your organisation. And our topic today, being the future of work, is certainly something that I know preoccupies the minds of most senior HR people in Australia and if not across the world. And I think the insights of both Sean and John will provide today will hopefully get you thinking and allow you to continue exploring what the future work may look like for your organisation. Just a couple of admin things. I'm going to shortly introduce both Sean and John to us, and they're going to give us a bit of an overview of their kind of involvement in the topic of future of work and the work that they've been doing. And then probably the most important part of the session this afternoon is a Q&A session where a number of you have already sent through questions in advance, so we'll get those addressed by both Sean and John. And then if you, as I said earlier, if you have any questions that arise during the session, please get them through to Kate on the chat function, and we'll do our best to get John and or Sean to address them today. So at the end of today, Kate will send you out some materials. There's a report from OI Global Partners, of which Choice and John, his firm, Harmonics, are members of, on the future of work that was done last year. So you're most welcome to have access to that. And also Sean is going to make a report from the Swinburne University that they've recently launched, and he'll make that available to you also. And I think some of the material that Sean will talk about today is covered up in that report. So can I introduce you to our two guests today? So our first guest is Dr. Sean Gallagher, who's the Director of the Centre for the New Workforce at Swinburne University of Technology. Sean is one of Australia's leading authorities on the topic of the future of work. He advises leaders on leveraging capabilities in the digital economy and dealing with disruption. Now, interestingly, when I came up with the concept of Disruption Circle and thought leadership and networks and all that type of thing, I'd never met Sean, but I'm glad he's borrowed my idea. Sean has made this quote, which I think is really interesting. Thriving in the future of work is to understand and exploit what makes us unique as humans. Learning has to be reimagined for the emerging futures of work. Given the challenges facing organisations today, Sean has positioned himself well as one of the go-to experts for those leaders wanting to understand what the organisation of the future may look like, what it means for the people within those organisations, and identifying a roadmap to undertake that journey. He and his team at Swinburne not only researched the topic with industry, but then apply the research to design learning solutions which can be applied to the challenges identified. He's a well-respected speaker on this topic and will provide us with some thought-provoking insights into some of his research and the questions they pose for Australian organisations. Our second guest today is John Fitzgerald, who's the owner and CEO from Harmonics in Ireland. John is a fellow member of the OI Global Partners Network, of which my firm Choice is also a partner. John is the owner. He is also someone I'm proud to call as a partner and friend as part of the OI Global Partners International Network. His firm Harmonics is a leading change management organisation in Ireland. They assist their clients in future-proofing their organisations in anticipation of change. OI Global Partners conducts an annual survey on the future of work where we invite our clients to complete a survey on related issues. John is our global partner who's made it his business to become the global advocate for the future of work. He's passionate on this topic and has spoken widely across Ireland, UK and Europe to groups of HR professionals. He's even written a book, Future Proof Your Career, on the topic, and has developed a career readiness assessment tool, which we provided you with access prior to today. I know from having spent time with John in Ireland that he walks the talk on this topic. I attended an event where he had a number of his multinational clients discuss the work John and Harmonics have done with them in assisting them to future-proof their organisations. They clearly regard John as a thought leader and someone who could assist in helping them develop their thinking on the future of work. John is keen to share his insights and knowledge on this topic with all of us today. And I know he will be entertaining, keen to address some of the challenges you face in your organisations as you anticipate future-proofing your organisation. We welcome both Sean and John to today's Disruption Circle event. So over to you, Sean, if you can just give us some insight. I'm going to share my screen because Sean's given me some material. So I'm just going to share with you. Just bear with me a sec.
Well, thanks, Damian. As Damian's loading the screen, thanks very much there. Rather than, I thought, based on some of the questions that were coming through and also based on a lot of the work that we've been doing, I felt it probably better to articulate what my message by actually giving you a presentation. It's a high-level view of the report that we've recently released. And it, in many ways, I think encapsulates a lot of the zeitgeist at the moment. What is the future of work? And particularly given the term that I increasingly use, this complex disruption, this unprecedented era that we find ourselves in. And also talk a little bit about the work that we do at the Centre. But before I begin, I'd first like to acknowledge that I stand on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And no doubt many of you stand on ancient lands as well. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to talk around about that topic, innovation in the unprecedented era, partly because it's really about how do we think about tackling the future. A couple of years ago, I was driving to work, listening to a podcast when we did those kind of things, driving to work and doing that. And there was a saying, and it hit me like a lightning bolt. We are pattern-seeking, storytelling animals. Those 6 words summed up everything that I've been trying to articulate and argue and put across as my point of view and the way that we see the world through the Centre's eyes. It's because in hostile, dynamic, rapidly changing environments, it's our ability to identify patterns and create narratives out of that and to socialize that. That is our ability to create value. And you have to go back, before civilization, when humans first walked the planet, it was our ability to see the patterns in the seasons or behaviors of animals and to convey that to our fellow human beings. That allowed us to survive and thrive in rapidly dynamic environments. It's also what distinguishes us from intelligent technologies. We're living and breathing in the digital economy. And that is, how do we not only work with machines, but what is the human competitive advantage in an increasingly digital environment? I really think that if you take home one little tidbit from today, it's that we are pattern-seeking, storytelling animals. The future's messy. And I think we need humans to figure it out, not just technologies. It's really about our ability to navigate uncertainty, which is going to be increasingly important, especially in the organizations as we face this unprecedented era. The work that we focus on is really on new ways of working, which is sort of like the new way of talking about the future of work, new ways of working. And we take a particularly human lens, the where, the how, and the what. 2020 changed work forever, and 2021 changed it yet again. So the what that we focus on is really focused on creativity and innovation. Back one slide, please, John. Damian, sorry. Yep. So in terms of the innovation, it's fundamental to our ability to navigate uncertainty and create value. The how is, what are the capabilities, the competencies and skills that individuals and teams require, and the functionalities that organizations require in order to enable innovation and fuel productivity. And then it's also the where. We're taking a new look on the office. We're calling it the new office. This is where messy work is going to get done in hybrid working world. Next slide, thanks. So this is our unique view on things. First of all, it's about creativity. Everyone is in laser focus on productivity, which is also very important. We need to make sure that that is complemented with creativity. This is how we figure out a messy future. So what the Center for the New Workforce sets us apart with everything else out there is these three things. We're focused on developing skills not found in job classifications, enterprise skills, creative skills, but also skills required to drive creativity in organizations. Those skills required to ensure that the organization is going to succeed, not just the job itself. We're also focused on completely blowing up and reimagining the new office in hybrid working. And I'm happy to talk a lot about that a bit later on. And it's also about redefining productivity. I think innovation should no longer be a separate activity, that in fact, work itself should be a pathway to innovation. The next slide, thanks. A couple of months ago, I was reading the Fin Review and this headline jumped off the back page at me. Australia faces disruption on steroids. And it grabbed my attention. I hope it does yours as well. It talks about a mammoth disruption in energy. It's about Andrew Forrest and his Fortescue Future Industries, which is his investment company, looking to use renewable energy and hydrogen and seeking to turn Australia into a green steel powerhouse. What I like about this is that it tells the story of Andrew Forrest. He's not waiting for legacy industries to be disrupted by a complex and rapidly changing world. He seeks to create new industries and to be the disruptor himself. And I think that's the key message here, that we all need to become disruptors. Next slide. We are living and breathing in what I call the unprecedented era. It's not just the global mega trends that we see and love, or not love so much, the pandemic, globalization, and climate change, as we know, but it's that combined with the profound transformation to society that is being wrought by digital technologies, the pace of change, the interdependencies, and ecosystems that are always expanding and evolving. That combined is, I think, without precedent. And rather than disruption, I think we need to start talking about complex disruption. We're all averse of the disruptive innovation that Clayton Christensen coined some years ago. It is about how a single technology disrupts legacy industries. Disruption is far more than a single technology, and it's far more than technology itself. It's really the complex world in which we live in. And it's evidenced by the rapidly changing demand patterns as your customers change their expectations and behaviors. What I think this means is that if your companies, if your organizations aren't constantly trying to create new value, that standing still means that your value is going to be eroding constantly. Next slide. I like this cartoon. I think it sums up pretty much everything that we're talking about. You can have the best laid plans and it looks perfect, but if it doesn't take into account the world around you, it's not worth the paper it's written on. Next slide. This is the report that we released a couple of months ago, Peak Human Workplace, Innovation in the Unprecedented Era. And the key message from it is pretty simple. I think organizations need to face complex disruption, not avoid it, because that's where they have to create value. Facing complex disruption is important because that's where the greatest potential is to create value. It's also where the gravest threats lie. And I think it's not a tech solution. I think the way we do this is by harnessing the creative power of people. Next slide. So we surveyed 1,000 Australian workers across the workforce, and we asked them many questions. And this is the key finding. We wanted to understand what workplace settings enable innovation in complex disruption in the unprecedented era. And it came down to these two settings. One is worker-driven learning, where workers are empowered to do the learning that they need in the flow of work, from doing new tasks to doing challenging new things, as well as working in a team, doing new tasks, and in fact, solving unforeseen problems. Creating new knowledge is the highest form of worker-driven learning. So we all know the 70-20-10 rubric for learning at work. Well, it's not so much the 10, it's the 70 and the 20. And in fact, the 20 is probably a lot more than 20, especially as we become increasingly collaborative. So it's really about the learning that occurs in the flow of work. That is a very important setting to enable new ideas, the creation of and generation of the new ideas that lead to value creation. That is complemented with what we call collaboration diversity. We all know that collaboration is important to do work, but rather than the intensity of the collaboration, it's the diversity which is really the prime indicator that drives new ideas. This isn't just about the diversity of having lots of different experts around the table. It's not just expertise and experience, it's also the diversity of perspective, the diversity of someone's vantage point on a problem. And that means everyone in the organization has an important role to play in helping create those new ideas. So collaboration diversity is where we bring workers together from across the organization to focus on a complex problem or a new opportunity. So it's really a broad, right beyond the team. And so those two workplace settings, worker-driven learning and collaboration diversity, are really fundamental to enabling and nurturing new ideas that go into creating new value. Next slide, thanks. I won't go through this in detail, but in the report, we recommend organizations establish an institutional capability to create value. We call it an innovation architecture. It's based on 3 levels: a learning workplace, a value creation system, and then having an adaptive innovation culture, the culture that drives the behaviors and mindset that allows constant innovation. This isn't a tech solution. It's based on talent combined in an organizational system approach, and then the culture that drives that. I'm more than happy to talk about this. It's quite detailed in the report, but just to let you know that I think that organizations need to start thinking about this mindset as to how they institutionalize innovation in their organization beyond the R&D department and so forth. Next slide. At the same time, what we found is that I think we're heading to a crisis of creativity in workplaces across Australia. Firstly, learning at work is not keeping up with the pace of change. On the right-hand side, down the bottom there, you can see 42% of respondents had formal training in the previous 12 months of their work. Now, formal training could be a 3-hour workshop, or it could be a 6-week course. Only 2 in 5 Australian workers are having formal training. 37%, which I think is dismal, only 37% said their workplace encouraged them to share knowledge and expertise with their colleagues. As we know, this is probably the most valuable form of learning that occurs in the workplace, yet less than 2 in 5 workplaces encourage it. At the same time, we also asked, very broadly speaking, how much time in a week do you spend on any form of learning? We allowed the work to define learning as broadly as possible. It could be sitting down at a webinar like this, for instance. It could be doing a new task. It could be doing a course. It could be reading something as broadly as spoken. Less than half of the Australian workforce does an hour of any form of learning at all. At the other end, only 15% are doing at least an hour a day, so spending 5 hours or more a week. I think we're not doing anywhere near enough learning, and often and as I'm sure all of you would know, we need to reframe our definition of learning. It's not just about doing online courses, it's about setting up the learning culture in our organizations that ensure that the formal structured learning is propagated throughout the organization. Next slide. I wanted to do a little bit of a breakdown here by sector. So we looked at three non-government sectors of the economy: the knowledge sector, so professional services, ICT, finance, banking, etc. The service sector, education, health, transport, and so forth. And then the asset sector, mining, construction, utilities, and manufacturing. I just picked out an asset here just to exemplify a point. You can see that on the learning by sector, so in terms of formal training, 52% of workers in the asset sector said that they had done learning in the previous 12 months. Yet less than 2 in 5, 39% said that their workplace encouraged them to share knowledge and expertise. I think that, for a start, I think they're both probably should be higher, but that difference there, a lot of companies, I think, are probably investing in the training, but because they're not setting up a workplace culture to encourage the sharing of that knowledge, they're losing out on that transfer of training. The return on investment is being wasted because they don't have the right culture to ensure that the formal training is integrated into work. Next slide. Another one, learning by sector. Again, just pulling out a couple here to illustrate some points. So if we look at the service sector here, you can see that 52% of workers in the service sector do pretty much no learning at all. And the service sector, being the largest sector of the economy, you can see that when I say 51% of workers, it's mainly made up of service sector employees. They are not doing enough learning at work, particularly as a colleague of mine, Heather McGowan, says, if you're not learning every day, your job is moving away from you. I think this should start to sound alarm bells. Next slide, thanks. The second thing is that diversity of collaboration in Australian workplaces is lagging. So at the top, 53%, that's the number of workers who say that they do collaborative work in their daily job. That's an increase from 46% a few years ago in a different survey. So that's actually not a bad outcome in terms of the intensity of collaboration. But when it comes to the diversity of collaboration, that working with colleagues who do not look like yourself, only 1 in 5 Australian workers say they actually have an opportunity to work on projects with colleagues from other parts of the organization. Next slide, thanks. So if we break down collaboration by sector, you can see that it doesn't matter what sector it is, what we call those out-of-team projects, so working with colleagues from across the organization. The best is, government does it pretty well. Government is first, followed by the knowledge sector, but you can see that the service sector is right at the bottom. I want to highlight the service sector here. The service sector, by its very nature, has a lot of frontline workers. They are the ones who, in many instances, are going to witness disruption before anyone else in the organization. They're going to see changes in customer behavior or see where a product or a service is no longer working in the way it should. How do we make sure that that intel is getting through to the organization? And that was the purpose of the innovation architecture. Next slide, please. If we drill down now and look at who is actually doing the learning and sort of do a subpopulation analysis, this is a word cloud. On the left are the workers and jobs who are at an advantage of learning at work. And on the right-hand side are workers and jobs at a disadvantage. I'm sorry to say that it's the usual suspects who are learning at work. Gen X, university educated, full-time, and especially senior execs and managers, at the expense of older generation workers, non-tertiary educated, and also frontline workers. As you can see, there are a lot of other, I can tell other narratives, but you can see that's starting to tell a pretty stark story. Next slide. And likewise, in terms of collaboration, again, the usual suspects. In this case, men are much more privileged being able to collaborate at work, university educated full-time, at the expense of women, baby boomers, and frontline workers. I think this is a real concern in terms of ensuring that we have a true perspective of all. Remember, it's not just the expertise when we talk about diversity, it's the perspective and vantage points on a problem that are as important to understand and help us solve the complexity of it. Next slide. This slide's a little bit complicated, and I apologize for that. The number in the brackets is the percentage, is the proportional representation of the level of education in each of those sectors. So if we look at the knowledge sector, it's made up of 9% who didn't go to university or TAFE, 21% who went to TAFE, and 70% who went to university. The number outside the brackets are those workers who are involved in out-of-team project work. So in other words, collaboration diversity. If I look at, say, the service sector, you can see in the university educated column, only 50% of workers in the service sector went to university, yet 60% of workers that do that diverse collaborative work are university educated. You can see a similar trend in the asset sector. And the knowledge sector is reasonably line ball. What I think this is a bias. I think this is a real cognitive bias in our organizations, that we're valuing the diversity of expertise over the diversity of perspective. I think we need to balance that. And I think proportionality is probably a good place to start, to make sure that we're reflecting the people we work with and also the way that they see the world. And the last slide, please. So I think I'm looking forward to our Q&A. I think there are many opportunities that come out of this. I'll just talk a couple here. I think that we need to begin to reimagine work for what I call disruption-led innovation. Not disruptive innovation, but disruption-led. How do we, as workers, help our organization face disruption? And that's starting to think of workers not just as producers of output, but also as value creators in our organization. Because workers are witness to this disruption. Frontline workers, people in the accounts department, everyone could be witness to disruption. How do we harness that? And by doing that, I think that we need to think of innovation as being part of all jobs. And then the second is around the workplace. So the data that we got for this survey was all captured in, timing is everything, November 2019, like weeks before COVID hit and the world changed. So all of the data that relates to workplace, worker-driven learning and collaboration diversity occurred in the office. Yes, we need to do further work to better understand the hybrid arrangement, but it does illustrate a positive correlation between the office and that type of work. I think that we need to begin to reimagine space around creativity, and that coming to work is going to be a place to challenge the status quo, not business as usual stuff. And I think this is a real opportunity for hybrid working, and how do we think of the new office in that space? But I'll leave it there. I'm really looking forward to the questions that you already had in advance, but of course, happy to respond to anything that I've said today. But thanks, Damian. And
thanks, Sean. Thanks for that. I think, as you said, you'll have got people thinking now, and hopefully our international colleague, Mr. John Fitzgerald, will add some more spice to the mixture. So over to you, John.
Thanks a lot, Damian and Sean, for a super presentation, and that really set the scene, I think, for what we're talking about here. And we're in the middle of a heat wave in Ireland, guys. Nobody can visit, but the weather is just incredible here at the moment. And I thought of that yesterday. I was off for the last week, and I was by the seaside. And you go into a deli and they're sold out of coleslaw and egg mayonnaise and all salad stuff, because we're not used to this. They're sold out of sun cream. And I was thinking, isn't that a great analogy for, the way COVID hit us, that we weren't prepared? and we didn't have our resources in place. So we
Don't
need
rub
to
it in,
adapt.
please, John. Where the whole of Australia is just about in lockdown at the moment, but you can go and enjoy yourself. It's fine.
Okay, I'm really cheesing people off here at the start. Apologies. So yeah, we've been in lockdown too. So we've been happy to get out, however briefly. We've got to dine outdoors, etc., etc. And I think that's interesting as well. When you mentioned, Sean, November 19, I was, it happened, COVID, for different parts of the world at different times. I was facilitating a future of work session with a leadership team in a bank in March 2020, and how we would prepare them for future of work readiness. And our Prime Minister came on TV and shut the country down. So we had to finish our future of work workshop on site and get home to our houses. So that was a real live experience for me. And I just took that out today to just, maybe even highlight for myself the focus of where we were in March 2020. And the three key themes at the time from that organization was their 2020 strategy was focused on change, and they wanted to align operational readiness with future of work readiness, which Sean has referred to there. So, their focus was a combination of keeping improving continuous improvement, be active participants in change, and become future ready to grasp opportunities as a result of change. And I think this is the big dilemma with innovation in organizations, this pressure for operational readiness and keeping the wheels turning in this mad, messy world. And then how do you create this space for us to innovate and to be planful and mindful about how we're going to anticipate the future? So just briefly about myself, I spent 20 years in the field of career management and sitting alongside many organizations going through change. And as a practitioner approach, I'm really going to maybe talk to some themes that I can see that you, as maybe many of you are HR professionals, that you might want to think of these 6 themes that I'm going to discuss in plotting out your future of work strategy and how you plan for change. And the last line I wrote in my book, Future Proof Your Career, was disrupt yourself before you're disrupted. And it goes back to that, disruption-led innovation that Sean speaks about. Most of us don't. And I'm working with many different organizations who are going through change, and it's almost they see this stuff coming at them, but they keep the head down and they keep busy. And I think our greatest challenge in the world of work is we have become addicted to technology. We've become addicted to, to emails and being responsive and reactive, when in effect, we need to, create the space to give us the time to anticipate and adapt to the future. I think that's, and I loved your quote there, Sean, we're pattern-seeking storytelling animals. And, we know the brain has, neural pathways, which are tried and trusted pathways, in which the commute to work was one of those tried and trusted pathways. And the same thing in our brain, we have habits and we want to stick to the tried and trusted ways of doing things. And I think from a HR profession, when you look at the future of work and when you look at your organization, everybody now at the moment is looking for, they're looking for the plan. They're looking for the golden egg that's going to give us the solution to the future of work and to how we're going to manage hybrid work, etc. And can you come up with the A to Z step, please, John? And it's not as easy as that. As you said, the future is messy. And I think the last 100 years has given us a world in which that pattern-seeking process was laid out in industrial work. And now we're moving into this new era in which it's less about following these systems and processes, but more about creating the space to think differently. So that even the Future Readiness Index that I gave you access to there, when we started to do work around career management and helping people to plan their careers, if I think about myself coming out of school in the mid-80s, my career guidance teacher was telling me what to do, and it was all wrong. But I mean, the key was that it was, you went into an institution for a number of years, which brought you into a college institution for a number of years, which brought you into an organization for a number of years. And Linda Grattan in The 100-Year Life speaks about this idea of this 3-stage life versus a multi-stage life. And I think we've got to be prepared for that, for ourselves and for the people who we're facilitating through work. So the future readiness model is less about telling you what to do, but asking you critical thinking questions. And there are 20 of them there to really consider yourself across 3 dimensions. And the 3 dimensions that I believe that organizations should be looking at now is the individual dimension. What's our people? How are our people managing through this? What is the lens of the organization, that dimension? And what's the dimension of the environment? And I think too many times in organizations, we go through one lens. This is what HR wants. This is what our leadership team want. But in any of our work in the future, we need to consider it both the individual, the organization, and the external environment. So when I talk about these 6 themes, I want you to think about them across those 3 dimensions. And I think it's a great little way maybe to map out for yourself on a sheet of paper, the individual, the organization, and the external environment. And think about this now in relation to the 6 themes that I'm going to speak about. So the first one is talent management. And I remember going back to about 2011 time, we were brought into a large financial institution, 15,000 people in it. And we worked with them on helping them to set out a career and reward framework. How do we career path for a bank of the future? And we did an awful lot of that, and we put it on technology. But one thing they asked us to do was to develop career journeys for people and how they would develop over. So when I came into the bank, where would I go next? Because people are always thinking, well, what's the next step for me in my career? But what we realized was we set out all these beautiful career journeys. But within 18 months, a number of those career journeys were no longer relevant because the bank had changed. And I think, again, our people are looking for these predictive or I suppose, steady moves in where they can manage their careers into the future. And from a HR perspective and an organization perspective, what we're saying to people is we can't tell you exactly what you're going to be doing in 18 months, 2 years, 3 years time. But human beings, being pattern seeking, are looking for the road. They're looking for the pathway. They're looking for certainty. And that's one thing that organizations are almost striving to find the perfect answer for people. But the very minute you find the perfect answer, business, the environment, the external environment in that dimension has changed, and your organization has to change as a result of it, and your individual people have to change as a result of that as well. So I think it's important from a talent management perspective to not be caught into, and there's a lot of legacy learning management systems that are out there at the moment that are kind of creaking because they're no longer fit for purpose. And organizations have invested lots of money in them, and they're saying, well, at least they're there and there's something for people to learn. But are they giving people the right learning for the future of work? So I would say to people, and again, HR got kind of outsourced this challenge. Well, could you put on a workshop for people? And again, I would be pushing that back to the line managers to say, are you having great career conversations with your people? Are we skilling people up for those conversations of the future, which are messy, which means that you might have to become vulnerable, which means that you don't have the right answer for people, but you've engaged with people. And that's the key to the first theme, which I think around talent management is engaging with people. The second theme I want to talk about is trust. And I think we're going to see the word trust, so big into the future, because trust is going to be so challenged at the moment in how you build it remotely. We're looking at people who are virtually joining organizations. They've never got to physically meet their people. I've met people who have, or I've on calls like this, who've been working in organizations for 12 months now, and they'd never met their team live, face to face. So that idea of building trust, we've got to do that in different ways. And trust is not built on a Zoom call in a structured way. Trust is built in the in-between type conversations. So building that space in your organization for people to have those, more social conversations than just a day full of back-to-back Zoom or Teams meetings is so important, because people, like we're social beings, we're storytelling animals. And how do we build trust? We build trust by learning about people and how they're feeling, etc., etc. And we've started to use neuroscience in helping organizations to understand how their people are feeling. So if you think about engagement surveys in the past, it was very much built on a thinking model. The thinking model was, here are the questions that we would like you to answer, individuals, employees, and the organization sets them. And we send them out once or twice a year. And where is our engagement survey? But we know that the Gallup engagement survey hasn't moved from 79% around disengagement for years and years and years. So we're doing these engagement surveys, but we're still getting the same results. So what we've been doing is combining a neuroscience model, which asks one question. It's called Employee Voice 24/7. How are you feeling? So it gives people the opportunity to answer that on a scale of 1 to 10, but also recording their responses, and through AI, giving back the organization the data of how people are feeling, not just today, which is that one point in time, but across all of your year. So I think it's so important for us to think about that across the 4 areas of the brain: instinctive and emotional, which apply to the heart, and then the more reflective and rational, which is about how people think, and the head. But previously, we all thought about these head questions. And I think organizations and CFOs and CEOs all think about those structured thinking questions rather than the uncomfortable pieces. How are you feeling? Because that brings you into a conversation which I don't have the answer. I don't have the agenda. And that's the real challenge for our people in the future, is to bring our human beings into a place where we're having those trusted conversations. So that's the second theme, is trust. How do we build that level of trust? And the last point I'd make on that is compliance and courage. Compliance is the opposite of courage. If you think about it, for the last 12 or 18 months, we've been following instructions by our governments and our health authorities in a compliant manner, back to when we went to school. But what's needed for the future? Courage to take risks, to have those conversations, to build the trust. The third element is trends. I think across the 3 dimensions, what are the trends for our individuals at the moment? What are the trends for organizations and trends for the external environment? And again, we're so stuck in the busyness of the operations of our own organization in that one-dimensional lens that we tend to maybe not spend the time seeking out what else is happening across other organizations in other sectors. And it was interesting looking at Sean's report there and the collaboration. It was interesting that governments actually, bodies were the ones who were collaborating more outside their organization. But where all of the innovation is going to happen is not going to be in the echo chamber of your organization. And people are almost in even more isolated cases now, because they're at home in their work. So the opportunity to look at trends around digital fitness. What do we need to do to build digital competence into the future? What are going to be the trends around cybersecurity, around COVID, around hybrid work? What are others doing, but what has never been done before? So just highlighting, and I'm a great believer in podcasts, and sometimes structured learning is great, but I think I'm really interested in the latest podcast and the latest trends that help me to be one step ahead of my competitors. So I would advise anybody to think about different podcasts that keep you informed and keep you outside your echo chamber rather than inside in your organization. The fourth theme is technology, and you could see that organizations were being led by digital transformation. In most of the organizations I'm working with at the moment, there's a digital transformation program. There's an automation program. That was happening pre-COVID anyway. And, why is that happening? I saw a report from Accenture where 14.7 trillion cost savings can be achieved through the digitization of work. So where there's cost savings, that's where the organizations will go. So they're spending the money on the technology digitization, but are they, back to Sean's point, spending the money on the development and the upskilling and the learning of their people? And again, I saw another stat, which was, back to 80% of organizations were going to see massive disruption in their sector, yet only 15% were upskilling their people for the future of work. So I think there's a huge gap there. We're stuck in this operational business readiness. People, I was in an insurance business with 300 people in it, 300-year-old insurance business. And all of the people were there with flip charts and post-it notes, and they were working out what's going to be digitized and what's going to be the higher value human work. And that was pre-COVID. But people were literally putting in post-it notes, here, you're taking away some of my work, and that's the lower value work that's going to be digitized. But while people are busy in those digitization projects, they're kind of, well, what am I going to be doing post that? What are the skills I'm going to need post all of this digitization when the technology is going to be in and rampant in our business? And, the data that, I suppose, another stat I found is that we spend 30% of our working week searching for data. There's lots of data. IBM have said now that I think 90% of the global data that's available was created in the last 2 years. So we're spending more of our time searching for data. What is the important data that we need in all of this digitization world? Because we can have much of data that we want, but which is the valuable data that we want for us in our organization? So I think that's important for us to decide that and take the time to do that. And is that the data that was required in the past? The fifth theme I want to talk about is time. And it's the when, the where, and the how. So, if we go back to Henry Ford in 1926, when he started building cars, it was the factory, it was the 9-to-5 work, it was the workplace. And that was the where of work. And that was why we built schools that brought people into factories. So we need to think now about, so where is our work? Our work is not just in a HQ, it's at home, but it's also in this hybrid environment, which might be in virtual workspaces. And I think it will transition from our bedrooms and our kitchens to more virtual, mobile, hybrid offices that we'll start to see sprouting up everywhere. And then the when of work is going to be really critical around, so is 9-to-5 fit for purpose in the future? I was in a hotel last week and I saw a waiter in the morning and I saw him in the evening, and I said, Jesus, you're working here all the time. And he said, no, I do split shifts. I do the breakfast and I do the dinner. Will we see people working split shifts now in work? Who says it needs to be coming in at 8-to-4 or 9-to-5? So we need to reconfigure work that's fit for purpose. And the how we work, I think that's the real challenge for individuals, because again, back to our neural pathways, we're used to doing things a certain way. I think we need to help individuals to structure their days so that they can be more, more effective and more productive, because they don't know how to do the work that's going to be needed for the future. And the last theme I want to talk about is transitions. And back to what I said about Linda Grattan, we're looking in 100-year life. I talked about it in my book about the 50 to 60 year career, where people start at 20 and kind of finish at 70. So we're living longer, we're working longer, but we're going to have a humongous amount of transitions during that period of time. And I said in the book that most people, back to a sports analogy, the first half was 20 to 45, and that kind of evolves for people, and it kind of happens, and there will be some transitions, but mostly it's somebody telling you where to go. I think the greatest challenge we're going to have around transitions is the workforce 45 and over, who are not the digital natives, but the digital immigrants, and the people who are really thinking about, okay, how do I, prepare myself for this future and that disruption when I don't want to change. And change is needed, but I don't want to change and I'm resistant to it. And I think that's the great opportunity, because talent is going to be scarce, going back to talent management, and we need to help our people to manage multiple transitions. And the work that we're doing with organizations is helping people to get ahead, facilitating future of work webinars to help them across those three dimensions of how do I prepare, how does my organization prepare, and what's happening in the external environment. And it's almost like some organizations have a fear of telling people what's happening in the outside world. The best career conversation that most people say to me they have is with a recruiter who's telling them that they should go somewhere else. They never come back to me and say, I've had a great career conversation with my line manager. And that's the real challenge, isn't it? Oh, well, we don't want to talk about that because we want to just keep you down there with your head down busy. And that's where we need to be more adult rather than parent-child with our people. So there's some of the themes. Probably gone on a little bit too long there, Damian, but there's some of the themes. I call them the 6 T's around talent management, around trust, around trends, around technology, around time, and around transitions. And if you can think about that across the 3 dimensions and just plot your own organization against those and say to yourself, okay, how am I thinking about these things? And then that might be of value to you, because I've been in lots of webinars and you can listen to Sean and myself talking, but how do you make it practical when you go away from here? So that's about me. Thanks,
John. Thanks, Sean. And it's a perfect lead in because everyone wants to know how to. So, and I know you've highlighted the fact that there is no magic bullet, but I'm sure everyone's interested in understanding some practical steps they can walk away with. In terms of the questions that came in advance, I kind of organised them into, if you like, 3 themes, and I've been building on them as we've been speaking. But there's emerging from COVID, the working style of the future, and building the skills bridge. Given that COVID's top of mind everywhere, certainly on the east coast of Australia at the moment, I thought we'd probably start there. Probably to start with Sean, I guess. Following a year where offices were 100% working remote, what does the market look like in terms of balancing the home office interface going forward?
Well, that's the question on everyone's mind, isn't it, really? And, I look at CBDs across Australia and across the developed world and developing to some extent, and they're pretty much empty. And, the economy of the planet really depends, it comes down to the office. Well, that's what it's been built on. And so I think that there's so many, if I can put it, vested interest in solving this problem. It's not just the organization and thinking, look, I've got this unused or disused space, what am I going to do? But it's also governments and so forth. But really I think it comes down to, there are 2 dimensions, I think. The first is, there's an expectations gap. And, I said 2020 changed work forever, and that was work from home. And during work from home, as we realized that at some point this wasn't going to continue forever, that employers started to survey their employees. And, what kind of role do you see working from home playing as we return to whatever the new normal is? And And I think that created a lot of expectations from workers, because many of them decided that actually I quite like working from home, and I'm actually probably as effective, if not more so, on most of the stuff at home than I were at work. And it fits in with my life, and I don't have to commute, and I don't have to, worry about public health risks either in the office or on public transport. And so I think there's, employers created an expectation with employees by surveying them. And as we find, the number varies, but it really lands about the same. And it's the same for pretty much surveys across the planet. It's between 2 and 3 days at home, right? I want to be at home 2 or 3 days, and it's probably slightly more in favor of being at home than in the office. So the first thing is, how do we bridge that expectations gap, right? And, I was talking to Damian and a few others before we jumped on the call, and, if I ask myself, if I do my own thought experiment and I look back over the last 6 months of work, and I genuinely, honestly ask myself, of everything that I've done, what really should have been done in a workplace that could not have been done as effectively as online? And I have to say, I'm really struggling to find what that might be. Sure, this would have been great in person, but there are many of you from other parts of the country that probably wouldn't have come in just for this. As much as it would be great to be in a room and to meet you. So really struggling. So which leads into the second thing. I think we need to change, we need to think of changing the mindset and reframing what the office actually is and what it's for. And I think that, and the work that we're doing, we're developing a hybrid working tool called Alt-Shift Office. And it's about the role of the office, the new office we're calling it, in hybrid working. And fundamentally, what we see is one of the, in addition to understanding that gap in expectations between employers and employees, but making sure that so we have to find the right balance between employees wanting to have work fit in with their lives. There has to be balance with organizational needs. But I think the organization needs to reimagine what its needs are and how they relate to the office. And what we are aiming for Alt-Shift Office to do is to think of the office in terms of personas. So what's the role of the office that can only, and to create a narrative, a compelling rationale to actually, create a story as to why workers would come back to the office to do certain things. We hear a lot of sort of throwaway lines, which, there's an element of truth in them, but when they say, oh, we need to get workers back into the office to collaborate. And I think, well, most workers will know that they're collaborating as effectively online as they were before COVID. So that in itself isn't enough. So how do we create different personas of the office? For example, think of the office as a showroom, or as an incubator, or as an ideas foundry, or as an airport lounge, or there's a whole range. And so what we're thinking is important is for organizations to develop personas of the office that are focused on creativity, collaboration, social interaction that John's talking about. It's often those interactions that happen, it's by talking to someone, I find out something that I didn't know that I needed to know, right? That's not going to happen in a Zoom call, or very rarely. It's going to happen in those serendipitous moments that come in the office. But we need to create a narrative around what the new office is. How does that relate to the brand of the organization, the culture of the organization, as well as the creative and messy work that the organization needs to do? So it's bringing in clients, at the beginning of a major project, and working with them in maybe a skunk works kind of thing. So how do we reimagine the office around these different personas that are actually going to help the organization create a narrative for employees as to why they would come back, and the role that the new office plays in hybrid working. I don't think that just saying you've got to come back in for collaboration or creativity or teamwork is going to cut it, because in all of our experiences, we know that we can do that online. So I think we need to, I think organizations, and we're happy to work with anyone and to help them understand what is their desired future state of the office, and how do we help then create a narrative around that that can then be an attraction for why workers will want to come into work.
Aligned to that question, or that response, Sean, the great Ross Nichol, who I know very well, has asked a question which I think is on the tip of the tongue of most people. That's all good and well, he's saying, but how do we work with our senior leaders to gain their buy-in to this concept? How do we act disruptively to disrupt our leaders to create that thinking?
There's I've got two immediate reactions to that. Let me talk about the data for out of the survey, first of all, and that is that. So remember, this is a survey of 1,000 Australian workers from all walks of life, from all types of roles, all types of organizations, 18 to 65-year-olds, bus drivers to CEOs, part-timers, freelancers, full-time, a nationally representative sample. The thing that, if I'm speaking honestly, the thing that blows me away is that we're finding very clear and strong signals about the correlation between, and we know from research about the causation, but we're seeing in the data, a nationally representative sample of all workers, that there's a strong correlation between that worker-driven learning and that collaboration, diversity, and innovation. We didn't survey COOs and CFOs about what their innovation program is working. There's no bias here. In fact, when we surveyed workers, they didn't know the purpose of the correlations that we would be doing. So it blows me away that in a sample of all workers, we're seeing very clear signals around the importance of particularly collaboration, diversity, and where workers are empowered to learn and driving those settings. The second thing, particularly for senior leaders, and this is something that they should get, and is that over the last 20 years, and it only goes up in volume, is that you wouldn't think of setting up a board of any company with people that all looked the same. You want to make sure that there's a diversity of perspectives, of experience, of expertise around that table. Why? It's not just about having the right expertise to deal with the complex problems that organization is facing, but it's also, they bring perspectives on a problem that you would value, that their frame of reference is as important as the one that you have on a problem. And the board is a great example of why collaboration diversity is important. Leaders get that. And that's why I think we now need to think of, well, then how do you see your organization as this amazing intelligence network onto the complex world that we are operating in? Your frontline workers have that, they may not have a university education, but their 20 years of experience of working with their customers is as valuable as an expertise around the table. So I think those two things, might be a way to start a conversation. The organization that I think has probably led the world in this is Toyota. And they established what many of you probably know is called the Toyota production system. And in that workers are not only sort of expected, but they're empowered to identify problems. And in fact, the company has a KPI, the number of problems found per employee per year, or something like that. They actually measure it. And management have to respond to the problems So, you know, it comes from the production lines in Japan. It started with an and-on cord and it turned into a red button. And it was anathema, if you think about it. It was anathema in the sense that if an employee saw a defect or a problem, they pressed the red button and it stopped the production line. That's anathema to productivity, but it's essential for creativity and innovation. And so what happens is when a worker identifies a defect or a problem, in other words, what we're talking about, the analogy for disruption, workers come together, they discuss what it is, they synthesize what they think the problem is, and then they elevate it. And then it gets discussed at a higher level and see if there's a similar patterns occurring, if other workers or other parts of the organization are realizing it. And then they try to understand the true impact for the organization. Toyota have been doing this for 50 or 60 years. And so it's, you know, coming down to how to, you know, but fundamentally, it's about curiosity and, you know, setting up the right culture to question and to be aware of things that, you know, might be out of the ordinary. And so, you know, there's a whole suite of different responses, Ross. I hope that some of that is helpful for you.
If I might just add to that, Ross, there's a great book by Margaret Heffernan now out called Willful Blindness, where she speaks about senior leadership teams. And it's about the lack of imagination in the C-suite. And if you think about senior leadership teams, they're typically, you know, there's a CFO in there who is, you know, safe in data. And that's where they want to stay, is the data from last year's figures, and we go for the incremental increase for next year's figures. What she was speaking about in that book and what we've been working with organizations on is scenario planning for the future. What's going to happen just in case this might happen in relation to digital disruption, etc. And I think that the CEOs have been really challenged in the last 12 months because they don't have answers like they had before. And everybody's in a state of stasis and afraid to make longer term decisions at the moment. But, you know, the work we've been doing is ensuring that those organizations really get clear for themselves on what makes them meaningful in the world. What is their differentiating factor? I've seen a lot of people, and I spoke about it in the book, talking about purpose at talent management conferences. And I think purpose has been thrown out there as a nice sweetie to lots of the graduates to join our business. We have a great purpose in the world, but do they live their purpose? And I think this is a real challenge to leadership teams now, to walk their talk and to really get aligned on purpose and what it means to work in this organization. And I think that is where we need to be bringing CEOs, is if we want to retain talent in the future. These grads are clever kids. I've got a kid myself going into college, and they're clever kids because they don't buy this talk of purpose unless it's lived out. And that is the key, is that CEOs and leaders got to say to themselves, you know, if we're going to put something out there in a marketing brochure, it's got to be real for people. And I think that's our challenge. The cultural agenda is the real challenging one. How do we keep, and I'm a CEO of a business, I've got a small business, but, you know, I've come into the office today, there's nobody here. And I'm thinking, how do I maintain the culture of a business that I started in 2006, that we've got an amazing culture built around trust and built around strong values? And my challenge is, how do I keep those people connected? And it's got to be more intentional around that. And I think that CEOs and leadership teams need to have more time that they allocate to that every second month, where they spend time on really focusing on those type of questions rather than just the data-driven figures. And I think that that's the piece that organizations seem to be comfortable in, the data and the figures, but how do you get that? You get it with great people.
I quickly, very quickly, I talk about it in the report about Ravi Kumar, who's the CEO of Infosys, the Indian mega digital tech company. And he doesn't hire just software engineers. He's increasingly hire arts graduates and even non-university graduates, because in his words, he doesn't want just problem solvers, he wants problem finders. And people who see the world differently can help find problems and frame them. The finding and framing of the problem, that's where the value is created. You can then realize it in solving it.
And just to build on that point, Margaret Heffernan in her book talked about artists are ahead of their time and their lives are saturated by risk. So that's the type of creativity that we need in organizations, are people who think differently. But if we think about people who went to art school, they were seen as kind of out there, but now they're coming more mainstream as having a place in our organization to help us think and be different.
Okay, I'm going to jump from the emerging world of COVID to the working style of the future. And I'm sure there are many people on the call today who are grappling with this problem. I'll start with you, John. What challenges are you seeing in preparing people for the future of work, especially as we transition to hybrid work? And then aligned with that, what does the organisation of tomorrow look like in terms of structure, how people are employed, how organisations develop their IP in terms of the way we do things, and how people are engaged? It's a short question.
You want a simple answer, Damian, do you? First of all, there's no simple answer. And I think there is a piece of, we've been talking about scenario planning there, but traditionally organizations have been built in these hierarchical structures, which are proving very difficult to dismantle. And not alone the structures, but also the people within them are difficult to dismantle. And people who have got to a certain level in organizations who don't want to innovate, and sometimes are described as the mud layer in organizations. They're there, and how do we shift these people? And these are the people who have been most at risk, I think, that we've seen throughout placement programs, who have been pushed out of organizations because they're not adapting with the future. I mean, the ideal future is organization structure is more a kind of a donut model of a networked organization where you're going to get a combination of people who are your core employees, who are your project people who come in for a certain period of time. They might be contractors, the gig economy that's there. And I think it's messy. It's not going to be easy to transition from this hierarchical pyramid structure where people have job titles, they have levels, they have grades, they have identities that are built on lifetime loyalty. And then you have these new people coming into organizations, this new talent. And I've seen organizations, go out to the talent market and pitch for really bright people to come in and join. And they come in and they see that the culture is so ingrained and so sticky. They say, I'm not going to learn anything new here. I'm off to another culture. And I think talent will decide the workplaces of the future, or the workforces of the future. And I have a quote, don't be yesterday's workforce. Don't be part of yesterday's workforce. And I think when you look around yourself and look at your organization, are you seeing tomorrow's workforce, or are you seeing yesterday's workforce? So I think the answer to that question is it will be done through facilitation. And I think that's where HR and leaders really need to become strong, is facilitating the workforce of the future that is suitable for your organization and your industry sector, not just, I suppose, working with small little edits here and there. It is co-facilitation and co-creation that will be required.
Any thoughts, Sean?
I twigged on the responding to the idea of IP. I think in many ways we need to break down the mystique about IP and innovation, and this isn't something that happens in the R&D department. When we're talking about, if I can put it another way, value creation, right? And that's when and how to, as in the industry, the industry 3.0 view of the world. So when, it was before we moved into digital technologies, the way to think about it was every organization was B2C, in the sense that a company had a market of 1 million customers. But in Industry 4.0, which allows us to have a unique understanding of every one of our customers, it becomes C2B. So instead of having a market of 1 million customers, we've got 1 million markets of one customer. And so solving their unique problem is increasingly going to be part of what's going to drive innovation and IP in the organization. And so that's where a role of every worker is going to have to play in, in being able to solve those unforeseen problems and challenges. And then how does the organization harness that to understand what a bigger picture implication that might actually have for it?
Okay, I'm a little bit conscious of time, so I might just have one last question. And I'll start with you, Sean, on this one. As the Australian economy slowly transitioned to a, well, I guess, economy 4.0, you just talked about, a smart manufacturing type economy, what do you see as the pathway for organisations to manage the expectations and develop needs of existing employees for such a future?
I think it really starts at a much higher level. So digital technologies, Industry 4.0, digital economy, at the very highest or even at the most fundamental level, it's a mindset shift around the business model and how you create value. As I was saying, as I just said, it's no longer about mass production and selling to the average consumer. Increasingly, in a competitive world where you're no longer competing with someone down the street, you're competing with someone across the planet for work, and increasingly not in your industry. We need to think of organizations will increasingly need to change the business model. And so how do they create value, and how do they look after the individual customers within their the market or the products that they offer? So I think starting at that high level and changing the mindset of that. And so that straight away, then you start to not see your workers as purely producing units of output. That increase, complementing that, it's the outcomes that they can deliver that are going to create value for the organization. How you do it, I think it's going to come down to, it's going to be different for different industries and different sectors, and obviously down to different companies. But one of the things that's a telco company, and this, that I think there are many, we need to experiment, right? And we need to figure out how to begin to change this mindset shift about disruption and value creation. And there's a telco that we did a little bit of work with, and they set up what they called a disruption ready group, where they bring together workers from right across the organization, from the front desk to sales department to out in the field to the tech guys, and got them around the table to focus on complex problem solving. And what they quickly realized, and so they did that just in the group, and then the C-suite had their own. What they realized quickly is that there was a huge divergence in the way that they saw things. That isn't necessarily going to work for every organization, but the concept is there. How do you bring together workers? And for a start, you're sending a signal to all workers that I value your perspective. Whether you're the CEO or the person on the front desk, it doesn't matter. Your perspective is important to this problem. You start to create a culture where people are valued. You start to create a culture where curiosity is okay. Where, and another good way to do this is when you get together, ask the youngest person in the room to speak first. Start to send signals in the organization about the value that everyone brings to a particular problem. A value imagination, the what if, and allow those conversations to go on. Make sure there's a psychological safety in the workplace to ensure that everyone's position is valued, but it can be challenged in a psychologically safe way, because that's how you develop and advance ideas. And it's really important to make sure it's psychologically safe, because the person that's put forward that idea should actually learn and be enriched from being challenged. That's the fundamental principle behind that. So, that was the telco did that in one way by bringing workers to all different stripes and shades and colors around a table to talk about really tricky, messy things. But the fundamental things are really important. The psychological safety, the curiosity, the diversity of perspective is really fundamental. So how you do that, I think it will be bespoke to each organization, but that's really where we need to start.
Darryl Mann, you were ahead of your time. John, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'm doing a session this afternoon with an organization, and it's part of what we do around preparing people across those three dimensions to think about from an individual perspective, and going back to the future career readiness. I think that is an instrument that we put into a workshop to help people to understand what's changing for me as individuals in this hybrid and COVID world, what's changing in my organization, and what's changing in the external environment. And the more we educate people to that, the better that we'll be preparing them for ongoing change. And in that future of work study, for example, that we did across the globe, Damian, the biggest people challenges that we had this year were adapting to change, managing remote workers, employee engagement, managers lacking coaching skills, and preparing for the unknown. So they're the key challenges that when we go into organizations that we're faced with, and then when we look at the key skills that are going to be required in the future, we're seeing skills like agility, embracing change, collaboration, communicating clearly, and critical thinking. But what we're seeing is that this is a key point, that 70% of people are dissatisfied with internal career opportunities, yet 75% of organizations face capability gaps. And I think that's a key communication issue that organizations have. When we do these future readiness workshops, what we get organizations to do is to communicate where are the roles of the future, what are the skills that are going to be required in my organization for the future. So then that links to potential future development. But what happens is mostly is that people are put on courses that are in legacy LMS systems, as I said, rather than ones that are really meeting the needs of the organization of the future. So that's the piece that I see around between supply, what people supply, and what organizations demand in the future. And by facilitating those sessions and workshops, you get people into a headspace. Change is happening here for our organization. Change is happening in the external environment, not just if I'm in financial services or if I'm in pharma or if I'm in whatever I'm in sector-wise. And then I'm changing as an individual, because what I wanted in my career at 25 is different to what I wanted 55. So it is so important that those three dimensions, I keep going back to them, that we get people to think about it rather than it's my echo chamber, it's my organization. Because your organization, your sector, your profession is being disrupted. And that's the piece that we need to keep communicating to people, is disruption is happening every day. Don't be part of yesterday's workforce. All we can do is warn people that this is happening. And they can either decide to make themselves redundant in the future, because their skills will be redundant if they don't upskill and learn. But quite often, we go to the doctor and he gives us or she gives us advice, and sometimes we don't take it. I should manage my cholesterol, but Maybe I don't, because I don't like that, because that's going to involve pain. So that's the challenge for people, is that they don't change ahead of time. So so that's my,
I think I love what you're saying there very much, John. And I think the key thing here is that do not think you're immune to disruption. I think the best example I have is that of is Uber, not from the original ride sharing, but they then started Uber Eats, and all of a sudden they're getting data on everyone's eating patterns, what they like to buy, when they buy it, etc. So here in Melbourne, it was I don't know what the numbers would be now. I'm sure they're much higher, but this 2 years ago, 1 in 25 of the restaurants on Uber Eats and Deliveroo, they don't exist. They're actually a dark kitchen. And so what's happening is that your local pizza parlor is being disrupted from digital technologies. Now, they would have had they would have thought, you know what, I'm immune to being disrupted. I just make pizzas, and this is so forth. But this is the thing about digital technologies and about disruption and about the world we live in, that no one is immune from it. And if you think that you are, then you're probably going to have a bit of a shock in the future at some point.
Well, with that, and I'm very conscious of the time, I will finish it at that. So thank you very much to Sean and John for their wonderful insights that they've shared with us today. Hopefully, and I can see from the feedback from people that people have really enjoyed the session. So thank you very much for being so generous with your time and sharing that information with us. Our next Disruption Circle, I think, is on the 17th or 18th of August. And we're going to have a live case study.
19th, sorry.
19th, is it? Sorry, yeah. 19th of August. And we've got a live case study where we're talking about the closure of the Hazelwood Power Station. And we're going to be talking with a couple of our clients and really delving into change and how that worked for people affected by that significant change on that event. So thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you.